Hi everyone and welcome back to another English with Dry. Today we're going to take a look at how you would plan and write a Macbeth essay. Now that is obviously from AQA English Literature Paper 1, or at least that's what it usually is from. And we're going to go through the process of attacking the question and deciding how it is you are going to respond to it. So, the first thing you would look at is the brief summary of what part of the play your extract is from, okay? So in this case, it's all about Act 5, Scene 5, and it is the speech where Macbeth learns his wife has committed suicide and Malcolm's army are nearly at his gates. Of course, he famously gives his tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech. So obviously you then read the extract in detail and look quickly at the question. Now this one is, starting with this speech, explain how Shakespeare presents ideas about fate in the play. Write about how Shakespeare presents fate in this scene, how Shakespeare presents the concept of fate in the play as a whole. Now that is obviously 30 marks usually, and then the 4 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Now, those 4 marks are pretty easy to get. You should all be aiming to get 4 out of 4 for that. It really isn't that difficult, okay? Now, step 1 that we would always go for is identify the key word or words in the question. Now, if we look at this one, what stands out straight away? Well, it's the fact that you are being asked about fate, okay? Now, that is immediately the thing you would think, right, everything I know about fate from Macbeth should be coming to the top of my brain right now. So the focus is about this theme. You're being asked to write about how the concept of fate has an impact on what happens in this play. So in simple terms, fate is events that take place that are not under our control. Usually they're caused by a supernatural power, okay? Now clearly that should immediately make you think about the witches, about Lady Macbeth, about Macbeth's choices in the play, and then how eventually he is punished, if you like, for what he has done. So then we go into step 2, which is we start to decide what our argument is going to be. Now, your argument is always up to you and can be about any aspect of the play you want, as long as you relate it to this theme. Now that is really the skill of English. It's not so much about revising every possible thing you can do. It's about being able to apply what you have revised to the question you're asked, okay? So try to pick something that's simple, because that's the best way to allow yourself to expand later on if you're able to. So, for example, my essay argument would be Shakespeare presents fate as something the characters try to control but are unable to, right? Now, this means you can talk about anything you've revised from Macbeth, anything at all, as long as you relate it to fate and how it impacts on the characters, okay? Just remember, whenever you're reading through what you have written, just ask, is this going back to fate enough? Is this focusing on the idea of fate? Step 3 then is to select the 3 areas of the given text to talk about. Now that is obviously the 3 areas of this extract that you would pick out and analyse for the first bullet point of the question. You know, how does he present fate in this extract, all right? So for me, the first one I would look at in this example would be died hereafter. I would then pick out all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. And then thirdly, I would pick out the poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage. Now, these are the 3 areas that I think in this speech relate most to fate. Firstly, there's him talking about how his wife should have died at a later point, but within that, there is his understanding that we're all going to die. Now, this is a point in the play where Macbeth realises he has been tricked by the witches and by forces more powerful than himself, and it's where he realises that he's not in control of his own fate. And that is what he means in this first line, oh, she should have died hereafter. But it's his acknowledgement that, well, actually, it's not relevant when she dies, but the fact is she is going to die. All our yesterdays have lighted the fools the way to dusty death. Now that is him talking about how people who try to take some sort of charge of their own destiny, either by looking at what's happened previously or by thinking about what is best in the present, these people are fools, he says, because that's exactly what he's done. He has tried to influence his future, and he's been made a fool of. At this point, Birnam Wood is coming towards Dunsinane Hill. Now, he doesn't know this yet, but he is starting to see that the witches' prophecies have been tricks. And then finally, he gives what is one of the most famous images in Shakespeare, which is comparing life to a play itself. A poor player, of course, player in Shakespeare's time would have meant actor, and how he talks about, therefore, that we are not in control of our destiny in the same way that actors on the stage aren't. They're following a script. And this is what he's starting to realise, okay? Now, this is the next bit, and in many ways it's the most important, because you then need to think about which 3 points in the play you're going to connect these to, because that's the second bullet point, the play as a whole. Now, obviously, if you've been given an extract from near the end, you're going to have to look at the start. So to begin with, I would say, died hereafter. Well, what does that make me think of? This makes me think of the part where he says, stars hide your fires, where he really first talks about trying to take some sort of grasp of his own destiny, but also his acknowledgement that his ambition has been ignited by the witch's prophecy and that he's going to choose to do something about it. The second one, All Our Yesterdays, well, this makes me think of Act 3, Scene 1, Come Fate into the Utterance. Now, this is where he is king, but he's not comfortable in his kingship because Banquo still lives. And he challenges fate. He kind of personifies it as this adversary that he could fight in battle and says that he is going to do battle with it, almost to try and beat it, and therefore be the one who decides his own fate. And then finally, with Poor Player, I'm going to connect that to Act 5, Scene 3, when he talks about the spirits who know all mortal consequences. That is the part just before the extract we've been given, where he is almost boasting about how he's indestructible, because that's what the witches have said. These are the spirits who know all mortal consequence, i.e. they know everything about humankind, and they have said this, okay? So he thinks at that point his destiny has been foretold in a certain way. He is yet to realise that he has had this trick. So all of my chosen parts talk about fate, but talk about it from the kind of opposite point of view, where Macbeth thinks that he can either control his own fate, or he can, or the fate has been decided in his favour, that he will be king of Scotland. So those are the 4 steps you need to do before you start writing the essay. Obviously, step 5 is to begin writing. Now, with these essays, you will hear some people saying you don't need an introduction. What I would say is I like to write one, and I'll tell you why. The reason is because having an argument in these essays is the most important thing, having a strong argument that you go back to. I like to think of it metaphorically as the skeleton that holds everything else up. All your analysis is great, all your contextual information, all of that stuff is lovely, but it will fall down if it's not being held up by something, and that's what your argument should do. So it should always be short, especially when you're doing literature paper 1 that's got the Shakespeare and then the 19th century novel. And that is why I said step 2 is you're working out what this argument is. And that's kind of what you state in your introduction. You can see here that in my first line, I state my argument. Shakespeare's Macbeth is a play in which the main protagonist tries to take control of his own fate by murdering the King of Scotland and taking his crown. Now you see there, I've made reference to the key word fate. Well, that's the most important thing you have to do. But that then makes it clear to both the examiner and yourself that you were answering the question you've been asked and you were going to say something about it. After receiving a prophecy from 3 witches, Macbeth, with the help of his wife, devises a plan to usurp Duncan by killing him. Now, what you should not be doing is offering the examiner a total plot summary. There's no need for that. They know, or they should know, what the plot is. But it never hurts to just give a brief, very, very brief kind of few lines about what the main parts are, especially as they relate to your argument. So what relates to the fate idea? Well, Macbeth's fate, whether he should be king or not, that is the whole thing. And so that's why I've referenced that he decides to usurp Duncan and kill him after getting these prophecies. However, his downfall and eventual death seem to suggest that he's unable to change his destiny and was foolish to attempt to do so. Therefore, Shakespeare's message could be that humans are unable to alter the course of their life fate has in store for them. Now, that is me again referencing that I'm making an argument and that it's about fate. But also what I'm doing is I'm doing that quite high-level skill, which is showing that the text has been written by an author for a reason. In this case, it's the playwright William Shakespeare, but he is writing this play to have a specific impact on a specific audience. And if you can show an awareness that that's happening, that's one of the high-level AO1 and also AO3, because they're very interchangeable, marks. And so therefore, always relating it back to your own argument is important, but also relating it back to the fact that Shakespeare is making a message. What am I saying his message is? Well, that humans are unable to alter the course of life, because at that time period, that's exactly the kind of message that the King James VI would have wanted Shakespeare to be getting out to his people. So then, paragraph number 1. I would begin always with analysing the extract, okay? I think it just makes the most logical sense. And the first quote is just going to be the first one I picked out. Now, obviously, we picked 3 and 3 other bits. That's, in an ideal world, you would talk about that many, but you don't have to. And obviously, there's no set amount, there's no figure of how much of the extract and how many quotes from the rest of the play that you need to have. But I think 3 is a good thing to aim for, because then at least if you only manage 2, then, you have still covered both aspects of the question. So I obviously start in with my "she should have died hereafter" quote analysis. Now, then I say this can have several meanings. First, it could be a regret, the suggestion that Macbeth wishes she should have waited for him to die, as he knew his fate was sealed and that his imminent death is inevitable. Now, you'll notice that I've thrown back in the word fate there. I almost have this little person in my mind when I'm trying to write essays for English that says, "Have you said the key word enough?" And if it goes too long without me mentioning that word, this little person in my head gets quite annoyed. And so that's why I always try to bring it in every few lines, just to remind everyone who's going to look at my essay that I'm answering the question. However, it could also be a simple statement that he would have died at some point sooner or later, no matter what. Now, what I'm doing here is offering 2 interpretations. Now, obviously, that is what you should be doing. That's how to get a higher mark. But I've also just highlighted it very easily. This could have several meanings, but is a way of saying, oh, well, look at me, I'm quite smart, I'm going to talk about more than one thing, okay? It's a very, very signposted way of doing it, but it's a very effective way of reminding the examiner that you are somebody who is aiming for those top marks, okay? I then talk about how at this point in the play, Macbeth realises he has very little power to influence his destiny, which is exactly what is the case by Act 5, Scene 5, and it shows Shakespeare's belief in the great chain of being which controls everything. Now, you've probably been told a lot about context with AQA English. What I'm going to tell you is that historical facts and information are not what they're looking for. They're not looking for dates, they're not looking for things like that. What they want is for you to show you understand what was going on then, or rather, when the text you are writing about was set, and how this informs the play. Now, the great chain of being is relevant to this question because it is all to do with fate, and people would have believed in it then. And so therefore, that's why I'm throwing it in. I'm not using it just as a kind of add-on at the end, oh, look at me, give me the AO3 mark now. I'm putting it in as an actual way of adding to my argument, shall we say. The noun hereafter is vague and so shows Macbeth's attitude. The only certainty we can have in life is that we will die. Now, this is the best way to get AO2 marks, is to highlight and zone in on individual words and phrases, okay? Now, I've said the noun hereafter because I'm showing off, but that isn't essential. You're never going to get an extra mark for naming, a noun or an adjective or an adverb. I just know that is a noun, so I've said it. If I hadn't said it, this essay wouldn't be getting 1 fewer mark, put it that way, okay? What the main thing I need to do is analyse what this word means and what it tells us. Okay, so then there's paragraph 2. Now, what you should always do is structure your essays in this way, so that you go to the extract and use that as a launching pad for the rest of the play, okay? It should never be one huge chunk of text about the extract followed by another huge chunk of the rest of the play, because then if you run out of time, you're not going to have answered the full question, okay? You are marked on your ability to do both things. That's AO1. So then I say immediately, however, this contrasts with how Macbeth views the concept of fate earlier on in the play. So I am immediately showing that I'm addressing the second bullet point of this question. But what I'm also doing is relating my argument back to the theme of the question. Now, this is keeping me on topic and again reminding the examiner that I'm answering their question. His inner ambition starts to grow, and before long he begins to devise his plan for gaining the crown. The very fact he's actively doing this indicates that he does not see fate as simply handing him the throne. Rather, he feels he needs to make it happen himself, okay? Now, this is my kind of argument about fate, is that at the start, he thinks he can control it, whereas later he realises he can't. When he's told that Malcolm has been named Prince of Cumberland in Act 1, Scene 4, he describes it as a step he has to o'erleap, meaning that to ultimately be king, he must remove both Duncan and his son. He continues, stating, "Stars hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." Now, that's a long quote. You don't always need to stick in long quotes. I just know that's a very famous one, and I've memorised it for this essay. This seems to confirm that Macbeth intends to act in a deeply unnatural, evil way and murder the king. However, in doing so, indicates he believes that he can shape his destiny in a manner of his choosing. Therefore, Shakespeare's message could be that when mortals seek to alter the great chain of being and interfere with God's design for the universe, they will be punished. Now, what I'm doing in this very last bit here is I'm showing that my argument about what Shakespeare is saying. The most important thing I can do is tie together at the end of this paragraph 2, where now I've addressed a point from both the extract and the play, and I can say, well, this is what I am arguing about the theme of fate, okay? I'm linking to Shakespeare's message, and I'm linking back to what my argument about this question is. Now, obviously, after this, you would go back to the extract and look at the second quote, and then go back to the rest of the play and look at your second quote from there, and so on. I'm not going to go over all of that with you, because I think you've got the idea. I hope this video has been helpful. Please remember to like and subscribe. Good luck.